The Boeing 737 hummed quietly as it cruised at 35,000 feet from Atlanta to Washington, D.C. In Seat 2A, Dr. Michelle Carter adjusted her reading glasses and continued reviewing the stack of aviation safety reports that would occupy her attention for the remainder of the 2-hour flight. As the Federal Aviation Administration's top administrator, she rarely had time to catch up on paperwork, but flights provided a rare sanctuary from the constant stream of meetings and phone calls that defined her days. Dr. Carter had worked her way up through the ranks over 2 decades, starting as an air traffic controller fresh out of college and eventually becoming the first black woman to hold the FAA's highest office. At 48, she commanded respect throughout the aviation industry, known for her no-nonsense approach to safety regulations and her ability to navigate complex political waters with grace and intelligence. The flight had been unremarkable until now. Dr. Carter had boarded quietly, nodding politely to the crew before settling into her first-class seat. She dressed professionally but not ostentatiously, a navy blue blazer, simple jewelry, and her signature briefcase that had accompanied her through countless flights and meetings. Flight attendant Brad Morrison was having what he considered the worst month of his career. 3 customer complaints, a missed promotion, and personal problems at home had left him irritable and looking for someone to blame. At 34, he'd been flying for transglobal airlines for 8 years, but lately felt stuck in a job he'd grown to resent. His supervisor had recently warned him about his attitude, but Brad felt the passengers, especially the demanding ones in first class, were the real problem. The incident began when Dr. Carter politely pressed the call button for the second time. She had initially asked for a coffee refill 20 minutes earlier, but the request seemed to have been forgotten. She was reviewing a critical report about runway safety protocols and needed caffeine to maintain her focus. Brad approached her seat with barely concealed annoyance. "What now?" he muttered under his breath, loud enough for her to hear. "I'm sorry, but I requested a coffee refill about 20 minutes ago," Dr. Carter said calmly, looking up from her papers. "Could I please get that when you have a moment?" "Listen, lady," Brad snapped, his voice rising, "I've got 180 passengers on this plane. You first-class people think you're so special, but you're not the only ones who matter." Dr. Carter blinked, taken aback by his hostility. In her years of flying, often in official capacity, she had rarely encountered such unprofessional behavior from crew members. She maintained her composure, a skill honed through years of high-stakes meetings and congressional hearings. "I understand you're busy," she replied evenly. "I was simply asking about the coffee. There's no need to be upset." Brad's face reddened. Something about her calm demeanor and articulate response triggered his worst instincts. He had already decided she was just another entitled passenger trying to make his job harder. "Don't tell me how to do my job," he shot back. "And don't give me that attitude. I know your type, you probably got that seat upgraded because you complained enough." The assumption was both racist and classist, though Brad might not have consciously acknowledged it. Dr. Carter felt the familiar sting of prejudice she had faced throughout her career, the assumption that her achievements were somehow unearned. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice still calm but with an edge of steel that those who knew her would recognize as a warning sign. "I'm simply asking for coffee. Nothing more." But Brad was beyond reason now. The other first-class passengers were beginning to stare, and he felt embarrassed and defensive. Instead of de-escalating, he leaned closer to her seat. "Maybe you should learn some manners before flying first class," he hissed. What happened next would be replayed on security cameras, investigated by multiple agencies, and ultimately cost several people their jobs. When Dr. Carter began to calmly explain that his behavior was inappropriate, Brad's anger boiled over. In a moment of shocking unprofessionalism and aggression, he raised his hand and slapped her across the face. The sound echoed through the first-class cabin. The other passengers gasped audibly. Dr. Carter sat stunned for a moment, her hand instinctively moving to her cheek. In her decades of dealing with difficult personalities in government and aviation, she had never been physically assaulted. The cabin fell completely silent except for the drone of the engines. Brad immediately realized he had crossed a line he could never uncross, but his pride prevented him from apologizing. Instead, he straightened his uniform and walked away, leaving Dr. Carter sitting in shocked silence. The passenger in 1B, a businessman who had witnessed the entire exchange, immediately reached for his phone to record what came next. The woman in 3A, a retired teacher, audibly said, "That was completely uncalled for." Several other passengers began murmuring among themselves, their voices a mixture of shock and outrage. Dr. Carter took a deep breath, her years of crisis management training kicking in. She had faced hostile senators, angry industry executives, and skeptical media, but this was different. This was personal assault. Yet even in this moment, her first thought was about proper procedure and safety protocols. She pressed the call button again, when another flight attendant, Jennifer Walsh, approached nervously, having heard about the commotion from her colleague. Dr. Carter spoke in a calm, measured voice that carried unmistakable authority. "I need to speak with the captain immediately," she said. "I also need you to document what just occurred and ensure that crew member is removed from service for the remainder of this flight." Jennifer, a 15-year veteran who had never seen anything like this, stammered, "I'm not sure I can." Dr. Carter reached into her briefcase and withdrew her federal identification. "I'm Dr. Michelle Carter, Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration. What just happened constitutes assault, and it occurred on a commercial aircraft under federal jurisdiction. The captain needs to be informed immediately." Jennifer's face went pale as she read the official ID. Every airline employee knew that the FAA Administrator was one of the most powerful people in aviation, the person who could ground entire fleets, revoke operating certificates, and impose millions of dollars in fines. "Yes, ma'am." "Right away, ma'am," Jennifer managed, her hands shaking slightly as she handed back the ID. Within minutes, Captain Robert Hayes emerged from the cockpit. A 25-year veteran pilot, he had flown presidents, foreign dignitaries, and countless VIPs, but he had never had the FAA Administrator on his aircraft, especially not under these circumstances. "Dr. Carter," he said, his voice mixing professional respect with genuine concern, "I am deeply sorry about what happened. Jennifer briefed me, and I want you to know that this behavior is absolutely not representative of Transglobal Airlines or our crew standards." Dr. Carter appreciated his professionalism. "Captain Hayes, I need several things to happen immediately. First, that crew member needs to be suspended from duty for the remainder of this flight. Second, I need incident reports filed with both your airline and with federal authorities. Third, I need to speak with your operations center about this incident before we land." "Absolutely," Captain Hayes replied. "Is there anything else you need for your safety or comfort?" "I'm fine physically," Dr. Carter assured him. "But this incident raises serious questions about crew training, workplace stress management, and passenger safety protocols that will need to be addressed at the corporate level." Captain Hayes nodded gravely. He understood that this wasn't just about one rogue employee, this was about systemic issues that could result in federal investigations, massive fines, and potentially devastating publicity for the airline. Brad Morrison, meanwhile, had been quietly informed by the head flight attendant that he was suspended for the remainder of the flight and would be met by company security upon landing. The reality of what he had done was finally sinking in. He had assaulted a passenger, not just any passenger, but the head of the federal agency that regulated his entire industry. The remainder of the flight proceeded in tense quiet. Dr. Carter continued working, though she found it difficult to concentrate on the safety reports. Her mind was already thinking through the implications of what had happened. This wasn't just about her personal experience, it was about what this incident revealed about broader issues in airline customer service, employee stress, workplace culture, and discrimination. As they began their descent into Reagan National Airport, Captain Hayes made an announcement that passengers would remember for years to come. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're beginning our descent into Washington, D.C., and I want to address an incident that occurred during our flight today. One of our crew members behaved in a completely unacceptable manner toward a passenger. This behavior violated every standard of professionalism and courtesy that Transglobal Airlines expects from our employees. The crew member has been suspended, and we are cooperating fully with federal authorities in their investigation. We sincerely apologize to all our passengers, particularly the passenger who was mistreated. This is not who we are as an airline, and we will take every necessary step to ensure it never happens again." After landing, Dr. Carter was met by a delegation that included Transglobal's regional manager, 2 FBI agents, assault on an aircraft being a federal crime, and her own security detail. The other passengers, many of whom had recorded parts of the incident, were asked to provide statements. Brad Morrison was escorted off the plane in handcuffs, charged with assault and interference with a flight crew's duties. His 8-year career with Transglobal was over, and he faced both federal charges and a civil lawsuit. The story broke on national news within hours. FAA Administrator assaulted by flight attendant dominated aviation trade publications and made major network news. The incident sparked broader conversations about discrimination in air travel, employee training standards, and the treatment of passengers of color. Dr. Carter handled the media attention with her characteristic grace and professionalism. In a statement released the following day, she said, "While I regret that this incident occurred, I'm grateful for the professional response from Captain Hayes, the other crew members, and Transglobal Airlines management. This situation highlights the importance of proper training, respectful customer service, and creating work environments that don't allow stress and personal problems to impact passenger safety and comfort." The FAA will be reviewing this incident as part of our ongoing efforts to ensure the highest standards throughout the aviation industry. Transglobal Airlines faced a federal investigation that resulted in a $2.8 million fine and mandatory company-wide retraining on customer service and discrimination. The airline's stock dropped 12% in the week following the incident, costing shareholders millions, but perhaps the most significant impact was on industry-wide policies. Dr. Carter used the incident as a catalyst for new regulations requiring enhanced crew training on implicit bias, conflict de-escalation, and cultural sensitivity. She also implemented stronger reporting mechanisms for passenger complaints and more rigorous oversight of airline customer service standards. Brad Morrison was ultimately sentenced to 6 months in federal prison and 2 years of probation. He was also required to complete anger management counseling and community service. In a brief statement during his sentencing, he said, "I let my personal problems affect my professional judgment in the worst possible way. I'm deeply sorry for my actions and the harm they caused." Dr. Carter never spoke publicly about the personal impact of the incident, maintaining her characteristic focus on policy and systemic improvements. But those close to her noted that she seemed to carry herself with even greater determination in the months that followed, as if the experience had reinforced her commitment to ensuring that aviation remained safe and dignified for all passengers. The incident became a case study in business schools and aviation management programs, illustrating how a single moment of poor judgment could cascade into industry-wide changes. It also became a reminder that in the interconnected world of modern aviation, you never know who's sitting in seat 2A, and more importantly, that it shouldn't matter years later. Global Airlines would be recognized as an industry leader in customer service and diversity training, having transformed a moment of corporate shame into an opportunity for meaningful change. Dr. Carter continued to serve with distinction, her leadership shaped by experiences both triumphant and difficult, always working to make aviation safer and more equitable for everyone. The empty first-class seat 2A on future flights served as a quiet reminder to crew members and passengers alike that respect, professionalism, and human dignity should never be optional, regardless of who's watching.